Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode, Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about Coco Avant Chanel, also known as Coco Before Chanel. And we are excited to welcome our guest star, fashion journalist Roxanne Robinson. Roxanne is an award-winning media professional based in New York, formerly Paris. She is the New York contributing editor for Fashion Network and spent 18 years as WWD's accessories and jewelry director. She regularly contributes to the New York Times, Forbes, Only Natural Diamonds, the CFDA, and Grazier USA, among others. And she now spends time visiting her daughter and friends and exhibiting in France. And while back in New York, she can be found in her garden with their French cat, at a trendy gym class, on the dance floor, on roller skates, or singing karaoke with her son.
I'm happy to be here. This was kind of my, to borrow from Shonda Rhimes, the year of saying yes.
So the way that I know Roxanne is that I was her intern at Women's Wear Daily in the summer between my junior and senior years of college. And I look back on it as one of the happiest summers of my life. I have so many good, vivid memories. And I still remember how Roxanne liked her coffee that summer. Half vanilla, half hazelnut, a little milk, and no sugar.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, the fact that you remember that, I feel like I must have really stressed that every time. Yes, it's about the same now. I just usually half caffeine.
We like to just ask a couple of questions up top whenever we have a guest, just to get to know you a little bit better. One of the things I was interested in finding out was, have you always been passionate about fashion? What got you started on the path of fashion journalism?
I think it was somebody who didn't fit into any of the other boxes. My high school yearbook quote, I went to an all-girls Catholic school. And it was kind of still not knowing what she wanted to do. I didn't have a way of, I wasn't artistic. I wasn't an artist. So I didn't know how else to express creativity. But I had, at that point in my life, maybe took an interest in fashion in the way it related to what sort of social trend. And by the time I had graduated from that preppy girls' school, I had gone from the full-on preppy craze to suddenly I was kind of getting into thrift store vintage dressing for the new romantic phase. This is all the 80s, of course. So it was a little bit of a path of just kind of being around fashion people. It took me a while, but then eventually I figured it out and I went to FIT and I thought, okay, I'm not going to be the designer, but maybe I can talk about it, write about it. And I sort of ended up a stylist more so first, but I always knew that I wanted to write. And I think Women's Wear Daily was great for that because they let you do both. And after it was 18 and a half years I worked there. I've really solely been writing since then, these last 7 years, because I had sort of said everything I needed to say with photo shoots by then. I was always interested in the stories. I would say the cultural component of fashion and historic, that stuff I really love.
Do you have a favorite designer or a favorite era of fashion?
So I would say Albert Elbaz was somebody who meant a lot to me in his time at Lanvin. I mean, I'm a huge Sakai fan right about now. I do think at the end of the day, no matter who's designing it, if you kind of want the perfect whatever, Saint Laurent is the way to go. And I think with the era, I'm definitely 70s, certain aspects of the 80s, but I kind of just love the way 70s fashion became so sort of liberated. If you look on a runway, everyone goes back to this era time and time and time again. It's sort of ironic because it's also remembered as a polyester tacky era, but yet for fashion, I think it always hits.
Do you have a favorite biopic, or is there one you would like to see get made, or both of those things?
Bohemian Rhapsody to me was like amazing. I love the soundtrack with Joaquin Phoenix and Walk the Line, right? I love that one. Who would I want to see? I know I have somebody.
Roxanne, you want ABBA.
Yeah. I think ABBA would be good.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
Right? Boy, the casting on that would be a good time too.
Yeah.
Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
This movie contains depictions of child abandonment, child neglect, the Catholic Church, nuns, future Nazi collaborators, adultery, misogyny, mediocre cabaret acts, and those big, old, aspirational, interlocking C's that most women will never own, aside from a lipstick tube or a bottle of perfume. Also, fashion people are in this movie.
Rena, can you give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Some of the sources used in this episode include...
I consulted Mademoiselle Coco Chanel and the Pulse of History by Rhonda K. Gerlich, and Sleeping with the Enemy, Coco Chanel's Secret War by Hal Vaughan, but this week we have an expert, so I didn't really need to do my homework. Roxanne?
Well, I did my homework.
Roxanne, can you please give us a 360 lowdown on Coco Chanel?
I would start by saying, who is Gabrielle Coco Chanel? I'd like to say that she was the first female fashion designer to build a global brand, including a fragrance. However, that honor actually goes to Jean Lanvin, whose brand was founded in 1889. So if you kind of think about it, she grew up in a way that already existing, because Lanvin is sort of credited with building the first fashion brand. She branched out into other categories, children's wear. She definitely had fragrance. But I would say that Coco Chanel's life, design legacy, and certainly brand name have endured better over time. Hers is the household name outside of fashion circles. Her branded interlocking C's, which, by the way, side note, were said to be derived from church windows more so than her names. The perfect tweed jackets with chain linings, the pearl necklaces, the camellia, her two-tone shoes, novel hats, and more are brand motifs that exist today. So in that sense, she probably prevailed over the first female fashion designer brand. You could also argue that Chanel liberated the female form by getting women out of corsets. And while she did, Paul Poiret and Jean Patou received more recognition for this, actually. But when I look at her work in relation to the time, I see that she sort of introduced this kind of pared back, minimalist look, infused it with menswear, and she introduced black as a color of fashion. I mean, this that was normally something you would wear to a funeral. Some of this look, because she also pops things with a white collar, or, there's a very also black and white idea at Chanel. And I've come to understand that maybe the nuns that she lived with were part of that inspiration. So I guess I'm going to start from her beginning. She was born Gabrielle Bonheur Chasnel with an S in 1883, according to some records. Her dad was sort of a philandering traveling merchant. It doesn't sound like he was too successful. He's probably spent more time in the local cafe. And he only married the mother, apparently, because her name was Eugénie Jean de Vol, but she went by, or Jean, I should say. She was a laundress. And apparently her family paid this man to marry her so that the kids were no longer illegitimate, because at some point she had 6 children with this man. So her mother died. This philandering traveling merchant did what any single father would have done in, 1895. The remaining boys who were alive, which was 2, one died, they got sent to work camps on farms. And the sisters And it really was 3 of them were sent to this orphanage. Later in life, she would take a decade or so off from her age. She had a flair for maybe embellishing some things. And I have also understood that she hadn't been schooled by the time they get to the convent, which is the Convent of Aubazin. It is the Congregation of the Sacred Heart of Mary, which ran an orphanage based on its mission to help homeless girls. This was a sort of stark, disciplined, frugal existence. But she did learn her trade there, which was learning how to sew. She gets to the age of 18. She can then sort of move on. And in that case, she went to a Catholic girls' boarding house because that would have been the respectable, decent thing to do in a town called Moulins. And this is a weird part about her life that I found interesting. She had an aunt whose name was Adrienne that was essentially her same age. So they kind of take up inhabiting together, and they're both working as seamstresses on trousseaux and layettes. And this is where this sort of stories about where her name came from, they were singing for their supper in these, I would say, slightly tawdry bars. And that was where, again, there's no sort of proof to either of these things, but they think, because she sang this song, sorry, I'm going to do this right. Qui a vu Coco. She sang that. It was a cute little ditty. But it could have also come from the French word coquette, which means kept woman.
This is fascinating.
Yeah.
This is much more interesting than I found the movie.
The thing is, Coco Chanel didn't really see herself becoming the designer at this point of her life. She was more kind of enthralled in the idea of becoming a singer in a club, cabaret singer. So she headed to the town of Vichy, and she took singing lessons at night and then delivered mineral water to spa goers by day. She tried to make it singing in these kind of déclassé concert halls. While she did sort of captivate her audience, she was a very different sort of look back then. She was kind of slim and fiery and sort of passionate. And it was kind of in great contrast to maybe the archetypal female of that time who would have been a little more softly rounded and certainly a little more sweet-natured. Anyway, it turns out she's not much of a singer. She doesn't wow the crowds that way. But back to her sort of physique, I do think in a sense we can also credit or condemn this slim as in mantra that clings in fashion to this day with her, because she I think she spent her life on a diet as well, but that's another story. She meets a young infantry officer, Etienne Balsan. Now, he was a textiles heir and what you would have referred to as a grande bourgeoisie. Okay, he was a gentried man. He lived in a manor house and he kept horses. Now, whether or not she showed up unannounced or he invited her, Balsan was her ticket out and into something better. It was a stepping stone. And this you would have called an arrangement that reeked of kept woman. So again, going back to coquette, who knows how she got the name. Her kind of exposure to his elevated style of living and his lively social circle helped propel her to the next stage of her life. She gets interested in riding these horses, but she doesn't want to ride side saddles. She borrows his clothes. She rips off the corset or even, loosens it up so she can move. I think that's important because there is also a tomboy aspect of the Chanel aesthetic that you still can see today. Hanging out with Mr. Balsan, she meets a colorful cast of courtesans / actresses. There was Emmeline de Alcyon, Gabrielle d'Orzilla, Eliane de Pougy, and Cécile Sorel. All I can say is I think this is Clara Bow and Mary Pickford of France, these ladies. That's where we should be thinking of them. But most important, she meets Arthur Boy Capel, the Englishman, the love of her life, and for whom the famous Chanel boy bag is named. his English heritage and dress further swayed Coco into like these masculine looks and led her to the tweeds. So, how did she become a fashion designer? So, I think it seemed, having been a seamstress and working with all those things, I mean, I think she did kind of see it as a natural way to express some sort of creativity. And she seemed to really take issue with a lot of the way these women were dressing at that time, because it was just sort of an over-the-top kind of thing, or too much is never enough, I should say. So, similar to Jean Lanvin, her first foray into fashion, she becomes a milliner. And apparently starts buying these straw hats from Galeries Lafayette, just simple straw hats, and then she chicly adorns them. But even though she's adding accoutrement, it's still less than what is typical of the day. And she has these friends, these stage ladies, and even her aunt Adrienne, somehow this woman gets in. She actually must have had the voice, because she apparently was successful in showbiz, and she wore these hats on stage. So she's in this love affair with boys. She's making these hats, and there is the famous story of Deauville. All of these stories have been reimagined by the Chanel we know today, whether under Virginie or Carl, because that's the era I know. You know, the new creative director will debut in fall. But the brand has always called upon these aspects of her life to sort of tell their story. A couple of seasons ago, there was a whole show based on Deauville, and they were all wearing these giant, what I would say are more like 70s floppy hats. So that is also a nod to her early days. So bringing up Deauville, she sees fishermen with their jersey knits and their stripes, and she gets inspired by all of this. So, and interesting, the way she actually came about that, because when she went from millinery to clothing, World War I had broken out, and she should be credited with being one of the first upcyclers, because she bought dead stock of this jersey underwear fabric. And with Boy's help, because he financed her first store, it was in Deauville on Rue Gontaut, Biron. Me butchering French is going to be the best part of this, ladies. But she made these unstructured, loose-fitting jersey garments. And apparently it also spoke to what was going on. As we know, every single time there's a war, women start performing tasks men had done because they're off at war. And it sort of coincided with a moment when they needed more freedom. You know, if you're the one now that has to, I don't know, plow the field, milk the cow, I don't know. But, you know, because let's face it, most of her customers weren't those type of women. Fast forward, she's 1915 at this point. She opens a second store in Biarritz, and it's the first time in the U.S. she's kind of recognized. Harper's Bazaar calls out this French designer named Coco Chanel. And in 1918, she buys a property, the famous 31 Rue Cambon, and that's also not for nothing. It's 1918, and she's a woman. She's not even married, and she owns property. I'm not even sure how that happened, but it did. So 1921, that actually opens as a store, and she's got a whole slew of offerings in there. She has the clothing, the hats, accessories, later added jewelry and fragrance. But in between that, you have the tragic death of Boy Capel. Now, he had married someone else for status, but they continued to have an affair. He dies in a car crash. It's a big point of her life because she never marries anyone from that moment on. She has several high-profile lovers, partners, whatever, but she never marries anyone. But around this time, she finds this friend, Misha Sert, I should say maybe, wife of Joseph Maria Sert. And she introduced Coco to the world of artists like Picasso, Stravinsky. She had this friend for a while, but apparently she reportedly introduced Chanel to morphine, which she used in controlled quantities to help her sleep at night until she died. Now, that also kind of means, and I don't know if this comes from the nuns, that she must have been super disciplined. Because how can somebody, for basically at that point, I mean, I've heard that the date was 1935 that she started. She died in 1971. So this 36 years of controlled use of morphine at night to sleep, that's kind of amazing because
Wow.
that's kind of not the track that would take most people.
Yeah, with most people, even with someone who can claim to be a perfectly functioning addict, at some point the addict will cease to function.
Exactly.
Yes.
She also, this was interesting, this was a newer fact for me to learn. During this time, she had an affair with this Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, and he was the nephew of the Tsar. And again, you'll see these things that come up in Chanel collections, but this is where her fondness for sort of Russian cultural designs like embroideries, Baroque jewelry kind of come into play. She did not date down. Every single person is like, got some sort of fancy title. So kudos for her. The other big thing she does around this time in 1921, she does her first perfume. She worked with a perfumer, Ernest Beau, and he had worked somehow in Russia too. It was part of this Russia connection, but he was clearly French. The only reason it's called number 5 is because he gave her 5 vials and said, which one do you like? And she said the 5th one. So there you go.
I had a question that I was going to save till the end when we see all of these beautiful dresses come out. And I feel like I can ask it now because you did mention Carl and also just the way that they looked at different areas of her life each season to inspire the collection. I was like, well, clearly she's looking at some dresses that she wasn't alive for, let alone designed at the end of this movie. Right. How much credit do we attribute to her as a creator when it is like Carl coming in and kind of making it their own?
That's why I kind of pointed out at the beginning was these sort of motifs. I mean, she had these ingredients for an aesthetic. Did other people take those and make a new recipe? 100%. And in a way, which we will get to soon, even in the 50s with her comeback, it wasn't necessarily well received. But again, I think it's more about, in a way, it's not like, well, did she design, 1,400 amazing dresses? Or did she leave a legacy and code of DNA? And this, because of who she was as the person, because of sort of like, she did triumph over a shitty existence, right? And she did exemplify this sort of liberated woman well before the flapper. Like she was kind of doing it in the aughts, in the teens. You can't sort of judge maybe that on maybe the work of Carl and Virginie, for instance, because I think it also moved at a different pace. Back to the point you said about the dresses at the end of the film. 100%. I was like, wait, I think I saw that in 2013 coming down the runway. Like that was Chanel because they funded this movie, right? So that was kind of a PSA for their house, if you ask me. But anyway, back to her story. By 1927, she was up to 5 fragrances. And this is about the time that she partners with the Wertheimer family for Le Parfums Chanel. Now, I don't know if I have the exact breakdown, but I think it went something like the Wertheimers had 60%. There was this like producer had 30% and she got 10%. So it wasn't the best deal. Like you got to look at the time. It's like, of course, did the woman get screwed in the deal? Of course she did. It was, but that all said, at this time, like she really is exemplified as this modern woman. She's, La Grande Mademoiselle of Paris. She's bobbing her hair. She's a sunbather. She's exercising, barely eats, smokes like a chimney. And, there's nary a corset to be found. Those have all been burned. It was very, maybe it was a premonition of the 70s. So this is where she has her house at 29 Rue de Faubourg Saint-Honoré, which is to this day used a lot for fashion. For instance, the Americans in Paris showcase put on by the CFDA used her apartment. So you'd be like, oh, and now we're in Coco Chanel's apartment here. So it's still a very active, lively building there. Spicy again when she takes up with the Duke of Westminster. He's like one of the world's richest men, apparently. She never agrees to marry him. And I think he actually wanted to. But, he's the kind of guy, lives on yachts, he hunts, and foreign royals come to his parties. But he furthers this tweed obsession that she had. But most famously, kind of in the latter half of the 20s, this is when she debuts her little black dress. Then this is when she's like launching costume jewelry. She wore these pearls because she thought it illuminated her tanned skin. So, there's all about the codes of who she is. Around this time, she buys a villa. It's called La Pausa. She's actually collaborating with this artistic director, Paul Uribe. But he's also her lover. And he also had the audacity to die on her. He collapsed after a tennis match at her villa. And then this is also the time, and this is kind of funny because if you look at where we are today, she goes out to Hollywood to see how she can sort of be a part of that scene. Dressing Garbo, Dietrich, Gloria Swanson. She didn't like the Hollywood scene. She thought the actresses were sort of maybe daft and flighty, and it wasn't for her. We're getting along here to a big part of the story because the story will sort of pause. So she moves from that apartment on Rue Faubourg de Saint-Honoré around 1936 or 1940, depending on which story you subscribe to. And that's when she moves to the Ritz, where she will live for the rest of her life, except for when she goes to Switzerland. Nobody was living under a rock in Europe at that time. They felt a German invasion was imminent. They knew that things were brewing and not in a good way. She gets into the Ritz either in 36 or 1940 with the help of an interesting character who we'll talk about here in a minute. She does go back to some French films. She works on a Jean Renoir film. We get to the point of Coco's life where it is undoubtedly the most controversial. I don't think anyone's going to deny that she had an association with the Nazis. She was probably a Nazi spy, basically, or at least a collaborator. I mean, and I also think that her time with the Duke of Westminster probably also spurred some anti-Semitism in her. She's with this guy, Baron Hans Gunther von Dinklage.
You could just call him Baron von Nazi.
He was an officer in something called Abwehr, the German military intelligence. And I'm not making any excuses for her. Was it her self-preservation to save her business? Or was it maybe she was this anti-Semite because of hanging out even back with the Duke of Westminster, right?
Because there are also stories about her closing the house as an excuse
not to pay the workers.
Yeah, and then also trying to confiscate the business back from the Wertheimers, who handled things very smartly. Oh boy.
Thankfully for them, they were smart enough to know when to leave for the US, and their business interests were held by a Frenchman during that time. I mean, so again, this thing with the Hotel Ritz, there are two accounts. It's that she got to live there because of the Baron von Nazi, or she had gone there prior to knowing him. That part is not super clear. With the Ritz, I don't know. Did they take it over fully? I'm not sure. Because or maybe they did, and that's why she could live there, because she was having this affair. But yeah, it's all kind of weird and dodgy. But I mean, there's also this part about her nephew. The nephew that some say could actually have been her illegitimate son with Balsan. He's in the French army. He contracts TB. He's a POW. So it seems too, that she's using these contacts because maybe that had something to do with it. If this was her nephew, I mean, even if it was just her nephew and not her son, she treated him like one, because his mother, if it's not her, had committed suicide. So she was out of the picture. So anyway, she definitely runs off to Switzerland to avoid being charged in any kind of a war crime. So she's got to be assuming she's guilty of something, right? And she lives there. I guess it's weird. They say she lives there in two different times in between about the war ended 44. So like 44 and she comes back in 53. But there might have been a break. I don't think she lived there for like 9 full years.
God, what would you do with 9 years in Switzerland?
Well, funny enough, since she chose to bury there, I think it must have made an impression on her. And she has this friend. I don't know much about who this guy is, but maybe he's a well-known French writer, Paul Morand. And this is the first time she actually sits down to try to sort of tell her life story. But again, we don't know what parts were embellished. She decides to make a comeback. At this time, she is 71. It's 1953. So weirdly, if you think about that timing, the new look has kind of almost come and gone. It was not her collection was not well received by the French. They kind of felt like she was stuck in the past. She wasn't moving on. But I do also understand that that's when she perfected those jackets with the weights.
I feel like Carmel Snow and Diana Vreeland understood what she was doing.
Well, yes, and Stanley Marcus, our friend from Neiman Marcus, right? He's kind of the one really credited with bringing a lot of modernism. I mean, it was always a very forward store. It brought fashion to Dallas and the US that had never even been here. But he was pretty innovative, and he's the one who started those awards. And he basically invites Coco to Dallas for a big hootenanny for like 4 days. She shows up in Dallas. It's like September. She's got like a fur thing around her neck, just being like this idea of Parisian chic at the time. And he like basically entertains her for 4 days, rodeos. She apparently did not like the spicy ribs. There's a story of her throwing it under a table. It hit, I think it was Estee Lauder, her shoe. And like, there's a dog like lapping it up underneath. Like, it's because they're like in a barn, like having this big dinner in a barn. So,
these are two people I don't ever picture in
together.
The presence of ribs.
Right. Either of them, right?
Yeah.
So, well, yeah, she wasn't having it. And she probably was horrified. French will cut a slice of pizza with a fork and a knife. Picking up a rib with your finger, like she was probably horrified by the entire thing,
I mean,
but well, I mean, I guess what I would say after this, and good point, you're right, Carmel Snow and Vreeland, they champion, and I think this was actually still in the days. You know what would also happen in the 50s? Which was interesting, is that sometimes when you sold your designs, like you literally were just selling the design. Like it was like, here is my design and you guys can reproduce it if you want. But then they would also have the real collection, but they would also sell these like kind of like copies. But like the French designers did this with their blessing. Like you're allowed to do this. Does that make sense? Like it's kind of crazy if you think about it today. But
yeah, because you can't assure quality control.
Right. But that was a big thing, not just with Chanel, that was with a lot of designers. Like they were literally selling the designs. And then the Americans, because we still had manufacturing capabilities to that degree here. She goes to Neiman Marcus. She has this comeback, and then it's 1971 and she's dead. Like, I don't know how she really got through the 60s. Like, how did that happen? Like, that was such a cultural revolution. 1968 in France was major. The women's revolutions, the student revolutions. We all know how much fashion changed in that time, right? There's not really a lot of information. It's like, and she gets up to 71. And I watched one of those shows where they have an interviews with her last assistant, although I'm sure that woman may have passed away at this point. One thing that I did see in a fashion show, she would sit the fashion shows would be in her atelier on 31 Rue Cambon, and I've walked him up those stairs, like mirrored circular staircase, and she was said and known to have sat on the stairs and kind of watched the proceedings from there. And they did a couture show when I was in Paris where they recreated that staircase. That was pretty magnificent. So anyway, she does return to Switzerland for her final resting place. She self-designs her tombstone. It's 5 lions to recall the perfume and her zodiac sign. And I think my last thought here, though, is just to maybe think that it is interesting, because also somewhere along the way, the Wertheimers really got control of her. They got control of the whole fashion and fragrance division, but they had to pay her bills and taxes for the rest of her life. So I guess that's how the deal was, according to Bloomberg. So had they not found Karl Lagerfeld, who was well into his career by then, he had already made his name for himself. He was already at Fendi. It makes me wonder what would have become of the name if they did not revive that brand, and or if they did and it wasn't successful. But and when it revived under him in 1983, it was interestingly 100 years since her birth. So that was more than 6 minutes.
That's fine.
Fascinating.
It was great. That was great. And we're happy to have that. Yeah.
So interesting.
Yes.
So hopefully I did her justice.
I think you did.
Yeah.
So now we're going to talk about the movie, huh?
We do.
Yeah.
We do. So I sort of have a grudge against Coco Chanel because I have a very pale, rounded, oval 19th century face.
You're a Gibson girl.
Yes, I'm a Gibson girl. I'm pale, I'm curvy, I have no cheekbones to speak of. So Coco Chanel made me go out of fashion permanently 60 years before I was even born. And I love whimsy. I love old-fashioned anything. And I always feel like if I had been in Paris in the 30s, I would have been Elsa Schiaparelli's woman all the way.
Oh, I can see that. Yeah.
I like to imagine that 1930s Rena would have hopped the Normandy out of Le Havre sometime in 38 with 20 trunks of Schiaparelli and Vianney.
I felt like I would have been I wouldn't have been in Paris. I would have been at the Kit Kat Club in Berlin. That would have been my scene.
And Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about the movie Coco Avant Chanel?
Of course. So Coco Before Chanel / Coco Avant Chanel is a 2009 film directed and co-written by Anne Fontaine. And the film stars Audrey Tautou and details the early life of the French fashion designer Coco Chanel. Film premiered in Paris in April of 2009 and then was subsequently released across Europe. It was a very successful film. It cost $23 million to make, and it grossed over $43 million. And also, when it was released in the United States, it grossed $6 million. So it did very well with audiences. And then we can get into awards talk later, but it received a number of awards, number of nominations, mostly for, aesthetics relating to the film, but also, Audrey Tautou's performance was very highly regarded. And I would just also mention that the director and co-writer Anne Fontaine had she has a really interesting career. She started out as an actor and has made a number of films, which is challenging for a woman to do, and also has written them as well. So, very personal vision at work. So I just thought that was really cool.
I'm surprised that this is the first movie we've done that was shot in a foreign language. And we're almost a year into putting out weekly episodes. And this isn't what I set up to do as an editorial curator. I want to do more foreign language films, more non-American films, and investigate how the non-Anglophone world presents its icons on screen. This happened because we felt that it was important to get the major musical biopics that everyone asks about out of the way in the first year. You're coming on at a point where we're finally free to really explore with our subject matter, Roxanne.
Oh, well, that's exciting for me.
I find this highly sinister, Rena, but I will go with it. I will go with the subtitles.
Coco Avant Chanel. We open with two little brunette girls on the back of a horse-drawn wagon under gray skies being driven to an orphanage in some foreboding brick buildings that, in a spot-on case of function-following form, proves to be an orphanage. We learn that Dad, who cannot bring himself to look at the children that he is abandoning, is depositing young Gabrielle and her sister with some nuns, and that it is 1893, so I'm trying to piece together whether they're using Coco's real age here.
My research on her is that she was either 11 or 12. So that about tracks.
These were beautiful children. And very serious. And also it was really good child casting too, to graduate into Audrey. She looks really pissed off every time her father doesn't show up for his visiting day, and I don't blame her.
Right. And like the fact that she continues to sort of subject herself to it, where the sister has been like, forget about it. Now, I do wonder why they never showed the third sister. Maybe that was just too many kids castings.
Casting directors love to kill children.
They do.
I think they make out like Adrienne is her sister.
Because you think it's the sister, she's been in that orphanage, but if we're going to follow facts, later on when she's singing in the club, that's supposed to be Adrienne. And it tracks more that Adrienne is the one who became an actual stage star, you know?
It seems like they mishmashed them together in order to streamline narrative.
There are a number of parallels being drawn from very early between the strictness of the orphan uniforms and the nuns' habits and Chanel's later aesthetic, I thought.
100%. I mean, that's what I was sort of saying too. Like, and if you think about a nun's habit with the white kind of popping out under the black, and, you know, back to wondering how she could have managed that morphine habit for 36 years. Again, maybe there was something about this, strict rigidity of that lifestyle by a nun in an orphanage that appealed to her in a weird way, or at least comforted her. It sounds like the house that she came from was Bedlam. So maybe it was in a way like, okay, I prefer if I had some parents, but maybe I'm okay with this kind of strict confines of childhood.
Her childhood seems to really set her up for, this sort of like dispassionate way that she moves through the world, and it definitely informs that discipline. She's just so cold.
Yeah, she's like a very aloof. I mean, she's aloof. Yeah. She's kind of cynical. I think she's a little bit cynical and slightly surly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So cut to a cafe in Moulin. I don't know if I'm saying this correctly. 15 years later, where Gabrielle and her sister Adrienne have an unremarkable cabaret act where they sing about a missing dog named Coco. I feel like they are doing this because there are not many career paths open to women in 1908.
Fair. I mean, yes, because seamstress by day, cabaret star by night. I mean, what was the other option if you weren't singing in the cabaret?
Not Gem and the Holograms.
Yeah. I mean, because I think some of those other women in that cabaret were doing a lot more than singing. So
yeah. they were doing the other option, I guess. Yeah. I concur that this is a very unremarkable cabaret act.
Yes. So Adrienne's man introduces Coco to Etienne Balsan, and Etienne just means Stephen Americans. It's not that exotic. Etienne dubs Gabrielle Coco, and he seems mildly taken with her sourness. She just radiates this sour nonchalance, and she is not impressed with anybody.
Exactly. She's still somebody who has nothing, but she's exuding that sort of haughtiness, like I'm above it all. I mean, she was even sort of above all the seamstress work, some of those scenes of her in the seamstressing,
So I have cut. How well could she cut? Were there skills she didn't have that she handed over to people who worked for her? Like, how much of what she did she actually know how to do on her own?
There are scenes later in the shop where there's multiple people working there. But at the end of the day, I mean, even to this day, like most designers that I knew when they were starting out in their East Village apartment, you know, cutting things on a rickety wooden floor, you kind of have to know how to do it all, at least in the beginning. And that's usually when your craft would get better and you would evolve your brand because somebody else had a better skill. Someone's a better pattern maker, someone is a better draper, somebody's a better cutter, you know, someone's an actual better sewer. So I think that she had to have those skills because I think that that's universal 100 more, you know, years later.
We cut to a shop where they're doing some sewing, and I'm just going to call her Coco instead of Gabrielle for the rest of the podcast, is the superior seamstress here. And I think that Audrey Tautou looks just right for this role. I've read descriptions where people talked about how Chanel had kind of had like a simian quality to her face that came out as she got older, and she has that a little bit.
What's simian mean?
It means monkey-like.
You're right. Not for nothing. I don't know that I ever see these pictures and think what a great beauty she was. She just had a certain je ne sais quoi style. And she had a presence and an ambiance and a things she exuded. Going back to this idea of her being one of the people that really enforced this idea that slim is in, you know, it's funny if you think about it in the timing, like people at the turn of the 20th century weren't like thinking, oh, I want to be slim, because it basically meant, oh, I'm slim because I don't have enough food to eat. You know, so kind of crazy that she sort of was like, no, this is actually a desired look to have. Anyway, so we're
Coco.
Yeah,
exactly. And we're still struggling with it 120 years later.
It's like she took everything that she was cursed with and then cursed woman back with it as an ideal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the sisters, they're sharing a bed and they're talking about fairy tales.
You sing the dog song again.
Oh,
I cannot overstate how average their talent level is and how unremarkable I find their dog song. Yeah. And Etienne is tactful about hearing the dog song again. He puts the moves on her, and it turns out that he knows someone at the Alcazar.
I was thinking about their little ditty, and I thought, how many of us who wouldn't really do this professionally could just get up and sing this silly little song? I mean, I can do some karaoke in front of my friends, but so even if they weren't that talented, the fact that they kind of did it, I give them some sort of kudos for.
Yeah, and you know? I would say too, like I think also I'm gonna be super charitable here. I think that there is a place where you could do this and it would be adorable.
Nursery school?
No, just no. I do think like there's like performance art. You know, like there's places where you could dress this up a little bit more and make it a little bit more fun and flirty and movement oriented, where like they're just sort of standing next to the piano. The environment doesn't suit the act. That said, I didn't want to hear this song again, and we hear it a bunch more times.
Yeah, right? 2 or 3 times. It's 3 times.
It's like, I'm all set. I get it. You lost the dog. That's the song. And then it keeps coming back.
Yeah, right. Oh.
Yeah, I haven't heard the same song this many times in a movie since That Thing You Do.
Yes. So they are going to go with him to the Alcazar, and they're like, we need a new song, which I'm like, yes, you do. And they need new dresses. And then they're about to go on to perform the dog song again at the club, and they get fired for not being sex workers.
Right. The owner wanted them to sell more booze to them too, right? He was saying beyond the booze, you should have sold yourself.
Yeah.
That was how I took it. Yeah. And they get fired, and then 2 other girls go out to sing the dog song and apparently probably do some upselling.
I'm surprised that
Well,
it took the club owner this long to figure out that he could get sex workers to sing the dog song.
Yeah.
yeah. No, the
And
stealing part was good though, right?
yeah.
I love that. Was cheeky. Like who wouldn't
Yeah.
want to? And by the way, we're taking these frou-frou dresses so we can take our act on the road.
Yeah.
This was not a movie for me. This was a Rena movie. Sometimes we have Rena movies and sometimes we have Sara movies. And this was a Rena movie, but I appreciated a lot of the elements of it. And I did like pick up that like they would put down things every once in a while, like, you know, the flowers on the dress and everything. Like they would just like drop hints about the things that were driving her to where she ultimately went. And I did really appreciate how they did that, and they kept like leaving breadcrumbs around that showed
Yeah.
kind of the journey that she went on before she opened her atelier, and like where everything kind of came from
Right.
that
Because I
made
think
her.
that every designer kind of some, whether half the time it's made up these days, I mean, I have to say a lot of times it's still very genuine. They all kind of have a story, like where they pick that up or this up, and so it is kind of a big part of the process, the way I see it.
And I'm obsessed with process in movies. Like I love seeing people learn how to do stuff. And I hate it when movies show people just like kind of walking in somewhere and being a genius. So I really did appreciate how elegantly they wove in all of the elements that would become her signature in
Yeah.
such lovely ways that sort of, just it's just really cool to see someone who is brilliant like putting the pieces together and to be able to get that insight.
Yeah, 100%, right?
So they have a new song about torpedo girls, and this torpedo girl song is even more unimpressive than the dog song. And then Balsan finds her working in a store with some hats for sale and some matron who she's hemming a dress for.
Yeah. And I always wondered though there about that hats in that scene. I mean, as we'll see later with the hats, but it's like, was that just because everyone wore hats in that day? Because it's just a weird foreshadowing, right? Because she's actually going to be selling some hats in this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And she goes out to dinner with Balsan and shares her story, and then they hook up.
Yeah. It's kind of gross though, right? Because he seems
very like the actor
old.
playing him, you know how like, yeah, like sometimes like you've got like your Brad Pitt who's 60, they
Right.
say, but he's probably
Right.
a vampire. And then you have a man who actually looks 60, and it's always really jarring in a movie. And this was one of those cases where I'm like, oh, you look like someone on
Yeah.
like the back end of middle age.
Yeah.
And
And
she
supposed to be a young officer in real life, so I don't know about that. But I mean, he was a good actor otherwise, I suppose. You're kind of like cringy.
You have to contrast against Alessandro Nivola. However,
What I want to know is she lying to Balsan about her past here because she makes it sound like they had money? It sounds like the story she's coming up with is stuff that we didn't see, or like she's fabricating. And I know that she embroidered her past a lot. Like she was always about the legend.
Yeah, and I think that's what you had going on here, right? Even when she sat down with that guy officially, Paul Morand, in Switzerland in the 40s, even I think he struggled with like what part was. I think she would change the same story. Maybe this was part of her building her mystique, right? And, her own fantasies. And that's probably what got her through that orphanage. Just maybe she was telling her dad, no, he's off in America selling wine, making us a fortune, and he's going to come back and get me. And I think she pretty much made that up for sure.
and then, they get their audition at the Alcazar, and they're like, fame and fortune, here we come. And then Adrienne shares with her that she is going to marry a very wealthy man and become a baroness, which good for her. No, it didn't work out that way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, not so fast.
Yeah. But she's pretty confident about it, and
yeah.
Coco is pretty unhappy about this news, and she has to audition by herself.
Mhm.
Yeah, Adrienne can't sing with Coco in the club, and I think that the stage lost nothing in Chanel becoming a fashion designer.
Yes, agreed. It was bad, and she did not torpedo hit it at all.
I felt embarrassed for her because this dress was so not her, even after she ripped the big flower off of it.
Props to Audrey Tautou, because it's not easy to perform bad if you're a good performer.
Right. Yeah. I'm like, God, there.
So
Go out there and suck.
Yeah, I thought she was delightful in this scene, because I was like, oh, she's doing a very good job being mediocre. And yeah, she doesn't get the gig. And she turns back to piecework, and then she decides, screw it, I'm packing my things, and I am going to go to Balsan's estate.
This appears to be a spur of the moment decision. She has this one idea to get out of this life, and she's going to grab it. And I feel like she is doing everything that we were told not to do in getting a man. Like, yeah, stalk him to his house, show up, say you're his girlfriend now.
And in other tellings of the stories, he invited her. So we don't know if this was done for effect, but you're right. It's a little like, it's cringy because you're kind of like, ooh, who would like do that? It almost gets cringier because she kind of doesn't take no for an answer is what we're seeing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how good do you guys think she is at lying?
I mean, she would seem pretty good at lying.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, she seemed to roll off her tongue pretty easily.
Yeah. So now he's trying to get rid of her, and he says that she has 2 days.
Right.
It's a long 2 days, because she stays there for a very long time. And she...
Like, they don't tell us, but I think it's like years in the end. But it doesn't come overnight. She kind of tell them how she does it, Sarah.
I mean, good for her. You know, climb that ladder, get that money so you can be independent. Yeah, we're learning to ride horses.
Which she kind of seems like she does that just to be like, how can I further like embed myself in this situation? I didn't get the feeling at all that she was like, oh, look at these beautiful creatures. You know, even she comes from horse country. She probably had nothing to do with them back in Somar. But, you know, it just is a very opportunistic situation more than a love of horses, no?
Yeah.
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 I mean, she doesn't seem to be that into anything. You know,
Well,
like she's like kind of like, there's a calculating sort of like, if this is what I need to do.
this kind of cutthroat thing that I feel like we see, and we see it in some other movies about Coco Chanel, I think kind of comes through. Like, and so she definitely had some sort of, again, going back to the childhood, very Freudian of us. She's just like, I'm digging myself out of this ditch and I'm never going back, right? It's very like Scarlett O'Hara if you think about it.
Yeah.
You know?
But at the same time, like, she's also, you know, she's like, I'm going to dress however the hell I want, which, you know, is kind of an interesting dichotomy because, you know, she's like, I will do whatever it takes, except I will do it wearing what I want to be wearing, and I will be comfortable.
Well, that is kind of done or said like a true fashion person. As long as we're in the clothes we want to be in, we'll do anything, Sarah.
I mean, respect. I have respect for this.
Yeah. So he's having a fancy party where he is hiding her from the fancy people. He expects her to do the things his valet would do, like undoing his cufflinks, and to also have sex with him. And he's being kind of dodgy about whether he's in the market for a mistress after all.
And we go to the horse races with Balsan, and we see her examining all of the fashion around her and the critical, like, the camera does. This is just like good direction where I don't know how they do it, but directors can be magical sometimes, and you feel like you're in the person's head seeing stuff.
Yes. very
And
much.
I felt like I was in her head seeing, like looking critically at the fashion
Mm-hmm.
and seeing the impracticalities of it. And then she runs into Adrian.
And so
Right.
I love Adrian's lace dress. It reminded me of there's this one dress in the Metropolitan Museum of Art collection that looks just like this, where it's like all lace and fitted. But Coco says that it'll get muddy, and I feel like I'm looking at this through the lens of rebelling against her, where I would love to dress like this every single day.
And in my mind, Adrian, when she's up against the horse fence, it was tight around her bottom and it was very rounded. It was very Gibson Girl, wasn't it? Back to that?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
So the lines were a lot cleaner than what you saw on a lot of the other women there. Balsan is trying to get rid of her again, but she decides not to go. And I would cue the song. I don't know. It's not actually the more you ignore me, the closer I get situation.
Yeah, that's kind of sort of like another thing where it just comes out of nowhere, right? Where she turns on a dime.
Yep.
I mean,
Yeah.
it is. She seems pretty impulsive for sure.
But also, this guy is her ticket out until she gets sick of him and decides and sees other ways.
Her next ticket, and at this point, she hasn't found her next ticket, right? That's like,
Nope.
Don't quit a job if you have another job.
Exactly. We see her like put together an outfit for herself, pants and a tie. It's very scandalous when she comes out in pants, but it's very becoming on her, because then in a scene, a scene or two later, though, we see her in like a very frilly dress, and it looks very wrong on her.
Yeah.
I loved that dress.
Beautiful dress, but it also, like, it very clearly was not, it just didn't work on her, and the way that Audrey carried herself really indicated that.
Cast well. The dress was cast well for that scene, because it was just like, what is this? Just, it was too much frill.
Yeah.
Well, that's the work of the stylist, is to understand there's a difference between what works and what works on me.
So she purposely made it not work on her.
But I guess before this, she's rifling through Balsan's things, and I guess her gambit is to just show up and ingratiate herself with his friends. And I really like Emmeline.
She's a famous French courtesan. I mean, imagine that. I went down in history as a famous French kept woman. Could be worse.
So yeah, we see that she makes her a hat, and it is the beginning of a friendship, which is lovely to witness. And also, we see her, like, as I mentioned, in that fancy dress, but then she goes upstairs and creates her own dress to wear, which is very her, but is very, very different than everything else that's happening. And I just had a note here. So the score is beautiful, and it's by Alexandre Desplat, who also has done a bunch of scores for Wes Anderson, and for, like, he's basically, like, done the scores for pretty much every Oscar nominated movie that's come out over the last 20 years. But I thought the music was so, like, the music was very serious for the things that were happening on screen. Like, you're like, is she defusing a bomb, or is she sewing a shirt to a dress?
Well, and by the way, that scene when she recreates that dress shirt thing, she takes her only dress. I was like, oh, it's giving Pretty in Pink vibes. Like when she had to make her prom dress.
Yes.
But yeah, and then I just couldn't get over, you have one dress and you're willing to take that risk with it right there before you go downstairs to the party. I couldn't. I wouldn't have had the guts.
But it works, like what she does. It looks modern. It has this blousey. It works really well on her.
For sure.
Because she's Coco Chanel.
Yeah. And then we hear the dog song again because Balsan makes her perform it. And this is kind of embarrassing because I'm like, really? You're going to make her sing the dog song in front of your friends? Not cool. But then enter the picture, Alessandro Nivola playing the piano.
Oh, yeah.
And hello, like,
I
welcome
mean,
to the
what's
movie.
piano player, because he was good in the movie for sure.
I mean, yeah, he did it really well.
Oh, wait, I know we're not supposed to go backwards, but wait, I did want to say something too about when she meets Emmeline the first time at that picnic. First of all, she's noticing they don't even eat because of the corsets. Like they can't breathe. I don't think it's just about staying slim at that moment. They're like literally can't breathe in those corsets. This idea where like she tries to fit in so bad and she's just like skin is skin. Like when Emmeline is sort of asking her if she's into men, women, or both. And I mean, I don't even know what that was about. I mean, there are some people who wonder if that Misia Cert was actually her lover. But, and oh yeah, see, this is, she said it too. She also said when they had to sit side saddle, they were like cherries on a cake. She also said something at the horse races about that, this women just looking like confectionery sweets, like in a sweet shop. And it's true. If you think about it, you kind of look at them as a whole. You're like, yeah, they could be candies and sweets and whatnot. But yes,
Yeah.
back to Boy playing the piano.
She's into him right away. Which can't blame her. And
right?
She's clearly getting kind of tired of her existing arrangement with Balsan. She goes to see Emmeline in a show with plans to escape.
Right.
And Emmeline mentions several other men who she could hook up with and some other things she can do.
She's like, you could trade up as a kept woman. I could introduce you to some more people to make hats for.
Right.
It's
which
not,
one?
Yeah, it's not a very broad horizon.
You can either make hats or sleep with this man for a living.
Two great career paths for women. And she goes back to Balsan, but Alessandro Nivola is still there, and
that's right. Yeah, he kind of hangs around, right?
Yeah.
So they mentioned something about a war, so I get the sense that World War I is on the way, but I'm not really that sure how much time has passed or when the war is about to happen. It kind of just floats on by.
Well, yeah, because she supposedly went to live with Balsan in 1908, where she should be 25. The war starts in 1914, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so again, I also think, like, don't you also think when it comes like, okay, so she goes to him in 08 and 1914 is the war. We are basically talking about a 6-year time period. I have this firm belief that things moved slower back then. So it wouldn't have been unreasonable that she was just there with him for years, right? Before, but she does get out of there. Well, I had that timeline. I don't know if the movie portrays this, but in theory, by 1911, she has the shot.
So it's kind of confused. Like, is there a war? Are you putting a war in my head? Or, anyway, it's she chats with Capel and she makes an orphan costume for Emmeline, where you really see like that collar and the black. And it reminded me of, if you remember the American Girl doll of Samantha. Samantha was the one that I had, and her Samantha Goes to School dress was like gray wool with a little white collar on it and a dropped waist.
Yes.
I think my daughter had that one too. Samantha Goes to School in a drop waist gray wool dress and a collar.
That's supposed to be that's supposed to be 1904.
Emmeline is talking about how she feels like everything's just out loose because she doesn't have a corset on. And
exactly.
I mean, I know how committed she is to slenderness, but also just the level to which Karl Lagerfeld would take discomfort. in his designs. I thought that it was interesting. Like, I'm like, oh, that's an interesting contrast. I know he had a lot of other, like projection.
So about Carl. I don't ever thought about think, Rena. I thought those clothes uncomfortable. What part didn't you think were comfortable? I mean, they love a knicker.
Yeah, like I would say like the extreme shortness. I'm remembering very, very well that bikini that just had the two little C's on it.
90s, maybe.
Yeah, that she was like, it seems like, and I don't know anything about fashion. It seems like she is committed to both like a sort of a chicness, but also a functionality.
Yeah.
And when I think of Karl Lagerfeld's designs while he was at Chanel, I don't think of function.
But how do you say, how the times have changed?
That's
she
true.
was addressing, a social convention of dressing that required women in these horrible garments. So she was trying to free us. Cut to, 80 years later at that point, maybe or so. Karl Lagerfeld's idea is that, like, women are on the beach in Miami and they need the teeniest bikini with C's that they can find.
Yes.
So we've gone through a lot of evolutions into what we consider acceptable dress. So, I could think of some other designers whose clothes were more uncomfortable, but anyway. Yeah, the costume party. What's she wearing? What does she wear? She looks like Oliver Twist.
I thought.
And Alessandro Nivola is there in a pirate outfit, and they finally hook up for the first time at this party. Like they go off together, and yeah, they're under a tree this time.
But also after that scene, I think that's also when Balsan is getting hip to what's going on between them, right?
Yeah, but he's kind of cool with it. He's sort of like, okay,
right.
like let's all be gentlemen here. Very French.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Well,
like, yes, you can borrow my partner. And
it's a key party.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's a more elegant key party because everyone is dressed so beautifully and they're all French.
Well, actually, wait, I think we're skipping over something. That whole scene of chasing the women around in the dark was messed up.
Oh, yeah.
That was I was kind of like, wait, is this happening? Like, I mean, I guess they were all up for it. Those type of women, they were like, we're good with that. But I was kind of like, I don't know. All this turn the lights off and one guy's like the aggressor. It's like Duran Duran when they look back at Hungry Like the Wolf and like, oh, yeah, maybe we should chase those women around. So, yeah, that one kind of made me go, But anyway, maybe I'm just
No, that's a good call out because that was a lot.
Right.
So,
anyway.
But yeah, she leaves with him and we see them go off to places together, and and we see this one like very beautiful shot of them dancing in a ballroom, and she is the only one wearing black.
I think that's like the most important shot practically of the whole film. It's like, it's so incredible. It makes such a point how she is unconventional to the styles and the tastes of the day, and she's going to do her own thing. The trip you're talking about, it's the same trip as when they go to Deauville. They're just at the casino at night where they just nightly have balls because that's what they do in those days. But I think that this to me is one of the most important parts of the movie, because we're seeing her understand this whole mariner look, this jersey that the men are in, watching, not jumping ahead too much. But I think this whole part of the film is, definitely, scene where Coco becomes Chanel. Like, this
and
one
also, you see her kind of flower as a human too, because there is like, she maintains that resolve and that sort of like focus, but you see her, like meet someone and be a human with them.
Sarah, are you telling me that she actually seems happy in this scene?
I would go so far as to say she seems happy. You see her like getting inspired while she's having sex, seeing the men in the in the mariner shirt that like came to define like the stereotype of France, of like when you think of French fashion, you're like Jean Seberg's haircut and the boat neck French top.
Yeah, the mariner. Yeah.
I did enjoy all of this sequence. I do have a note here that I don't like any of these people. They're all so mean to each other. Just like everybody's sort of like, yeah, you can. I'm not attached to you. It's okay. You go do what you want.
Well, kind of like rich people behaving badly, right? I mean, or at least rich / cosmopolitan. I mean, there's a line I think she says somewhere around this time where she says, wasn't her that said this line from Jules Renard, a good sense of bad taste?
Sure.
It really struck me. I like that one, but
that is a good one.
But you know how you were saying how Balsan, like, he sort of didn't care, but they also sort of depicted this like affection between them that I'm like, I wonder if that was so real. And I wonder if he would have been that French. Like, I don't know. Some of that is a bit of a misnomer about the French.
Yes. Yes, because they're also very passionate people.
And jealous, so I feel like jealousy is a big thing there.
But also it seems like their relationship has not necessarily, there is like a sort of, there's a transactional nature to it, but there is also like almost a paternalistic quality to it, especially as the movie goes on and as they do like end their romantic relationship, such as it was, like, and they do maintain that friendship.
Like, she definitely recognized that, she'd still maybe be in that boarding house sharing a bed with her cousin. Somebody.
Balsan asks Boy, when are you going to tell her? Because Boy is engaged to an English woman.
Yes.
These people's lives are very complicated.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, this whole part about the marriage thing, I felt like that whole thing went on. It was a little, maybe it was just too, I don't know. I thought it dragged on. I was like, I don't know. This is like too much. There's better a mistress than a wife. The whole rejection of like I feel like she's putting on a little bit of an act there. No, like as if she doesn't want any part of it.
Balsan is worried that she's starting to leave him, and Emmeline arrives with another hat client, and there's some talk about marriage.
And but where's the scene? I thought we were talking about the scene where Boy comes back and they're in the piano room and they're standing by the window and she's already sort of understood. Like she acts like she's resigned to the situation and she seems kind of defensive about the whole thing of marriage.
I think that she's putting on an act of you can't fire me, I quit.
Yes, right. When that's where she says this thing about better to die a mistress than a wife, because she talks about her mother died of a broken heart. So I feel like, part was a little like, I don't know. I felt like things kind of slowed down there for me. And I was like,
yeah.
But it does seem kind of like the underlying thing is also starting to be like, okay, so we're basically hearing that she can't get anywhere in life without the help of a man, which is then kind of depressing. So maybe that's why it was kind of like,
So could women have their own bank accounts? Like women needed sign off from a male relative to get credit cards until
until 1976.
Yeah. Country. And it's a good question how different it was in France. But so right. So they kind of know that he's getting married. So then forget how it transitions to, how does it come that he opens a store for her?
Yeah, I feel like it does get a little bit, it's just brought up in conversation. Like, I think the film knows it needs to wind down somewhere around here. And on the whole, I'd like to see more clothes. Like,
Right.
um,
So funny though, 'cause even when we look at her life, it's kind of like it's not like a whole thing about, oh, she made this, she made that. That's what I was saying at the very beginning. It's almost like the legacy of who she was versus the 1,000 gowns she designed. Whereas I think if you're looking at Carl, yes, Carl had his own colorful life, but you're going to talk about the clothes almost a lot more with Carl than you are her. And I don't think it's just because of the time period. And he was a little more closer to the time we're in now, right? Or he makes the Chanel we know today. I mean, she definitely had a lot of designs. Maybe that's the next book we have to find, Rena. Like, just talk about her body of work.
yeah.
All this other nonsense. Cause like, there needs to be like a maybe, just like a catalog. I mean, they do have that archive. It's in a secret location. So maybe they need to start like photographing that stuff and busting it out more. I don't know.
Yeah, I would
I mean,
have liked a little less Avant in this movie.
yeah. Well, there you go. Right.
Yeah.
And wait, as soon as I said that, I said, but then again, that's what Manifesto was. The exhibit that I reviewed, it was at the Palais Galleria, which, does all the great fashion things.
I remember there was one at the Met, years before that, but where they had one of her first LBDs next to this Poiret dress that was heavily embroidered.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
So anyway, she leaves Balsan, cuts her hair, and makes some hats.
yes. And apparently those are the hats that she originally, when she started that, was buying them at the Galleries Lafayette, which I think is just hilarious. It's like saying I went to Target and got some hats and then I decorated them.
What is that called? Like upscaling?
Right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
She's the first known person to be doing that, to be like, I'm going to make this more valuable.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, and I happened to note here, I was like, oh, you know what else her clothes are good for? Easier sexing. Like,
All that stuff to take off, right?
yeah. I was like, oh, they can just stay. They're living free and easy here. That is another thing her clothes are good for. There's not as much like work to do there, and they're just like they're having a great time. They're in love.
Yeah, and she's okay with the fact that he has a wife, possibly children somewhere else. She's doing her thing. He comes when he comes. I mean, well, that was a weird double entendre. But, like, it's like, c'est la vie,
Yeah, she's
La vie,
working.
la vie. Yeah. So things are going okay until.
Yeah.
You have a note here, Sarah, convertible in the snow, this is a bad choice.
Oh yes, they're at one point driving away from somewhere, I can't remember where, but they're driving away and they've got the top down in their convertible and it is straight up snowing out, and I was like, that's not, that's not a great choice. So I was like,
Yeah, but it was like Paris.
Yeah.
Snow is like, snow is like, it's not even snow. It's just like, it's not even rain.
Also, like, just from an art direction perspective, I'm like, you've got the black, you've got the white, it's all beautiful. Like, everything looks very glam, even though, yes, like, I can only imagine how unpleasant it would be to ride in a convertible in the snow. But
right.
It looks good.
Yeah.
But it's also like they're starting to lead us in the direction where we know like something bad's about to happen.
Because she's at the theater where she learns that boy is dead. I don't understand why she has to drive out to see the wrecked car.
Maybe I just got the sense that she just kind of needed to see it to believe it. And apparently that part, is pretty accurate.
Oh.
Yeah, because in her other biography, they kind of showed that whole thing. So, I mean, they kind of cartoon it. Have you ever seen that one? Well, anyway, so that's what I thought. I just felt like,
yeah, she had to
kind of understand that.
She had to see it to make it real.
Yeah. But you should go back to that banking stuff for a minute, though. It's like, it is a good point there, like you said. Like, I wonder how accurate that was in France. But he was saying to her, I have control of it, because maybe it was the same situation. But at some point she overcomes that. Or there was some other man that was like posing for her in a banking situation, because after he dies, she buys 31 Rue Cambon. So she had control of things shortly after that, however it worked.
And good for her. Like, if any woman should be doing that, it's her, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's devastated. But also you see how she is very determined to continue her work and to continue, achieving her vision.
Yeah. But like when they cut to her in that scene where, oh yeah, I mean, one thing we haven't said here too is like, did she, I mean, we're assuming she really did smoke that much? Constantly.
Yeah.
And so she's like there and she has the cigarette, she's got it up against her head, and like you get the sense that she's like, like she's struggling to go on. As much as she's determined, the struggle is real.
Yeah.
And you also get the sense this is like, how much time after that car accident do you think that scene was? Because I felt like it was sort of like, and here we are many years later and she's still devastated.
I don't know. Hard time
working with
figuring out
fabric there.
Yeah. I had a
like the
real
timeline
hard time figuring out the timeline.
Yeah.
Because that could have been like a week later. That could have been 2 years later.
Right. And it is, we do know without, we said, you're going to spoiler, but like, it does kind of fast forward in a weird way and leaves out a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not clear like what year she's in when they show her having all of her models walk down in the dresses. But yeah, so Sarah, you did note that it's kind of spectacular seeing all of the dresses, though.
Yeah, like to me, like as I said, this was not a movie for me, but I appreciated what they were doing, where I like forgot all of the things I was just like whatever about during this, and so just like taken aback by the visual of seeing her look at what she accomplished and by what lived on after, like by what was done in her name as time went on. And like, just like the beauty of that was like breathtaking to see that.
But I do think that's just because it was sort of like the PSA for the brand.
Yeah.
Look what we've done with all of her genius and her spirit, and continued. But yeah, like, I don't know if the average moviegoer would have been like, wait a minute, that's a 2009 long. Like, I don't know that they would pick that up. You guys who look at films so much differently than the average viewer, then, Rena has the fashion. Sarah, you say you don't have the fashion, but I think you have a lot more than you think you do. People like us might say these things like, but yeah, it I don't think anybody, the average person was not picking up on that.
Yeah, but the visual that they paint in the end, though, to me was very powerful, and also the way Audrey really became kind of the Coco Chanel that we knew, just like in terms of like the iconic look, the iconic, the pose, the seat, the sitting and the watching, and and then even like seeing her put together, a suit.
Yes. Like, yeah, I'm kind of think now, how did we feel like how they aged her?
I think they didn't age her past like the 1930s, because this film sort of cuts off where she's like gotten to that first apotheosis, but it's not specific. And the end scroll fails to, as you have a note here, Sarah, the end scroll fails to mention that time she collaborated with the Nazis. So I think she should have had her head shaved in the street as a traitor for collaborating with the Nazis.
Well, there you go. Yeah, like those women that they showed afterwards.
Yeah.
Well, that that's interesting. They brought that up in the other documentary I watched prior to our little meeting here tonight about how they did that with the collaborators. But you're right, she should have been. But I think it's because she had already hightailed it to Switzerland. And I have to believe at that point, I don't think it was just quote unquote like her collaboration with them that helped save her neck. I think it was also her, even if she was broken up from the Duke of Westminster, I think she still had ties to some powerful people.
Oh, friend Winston Churchill, who she used to go hunting with, wrote a note that got her off from the investigation.
Yes. God, all of this is sounding so familiar. Is it pardon? You mean a pardon?
Winston just said, yeah, don't bother going after my old friend Coco.
Yeah. She's just a dressmaker.
Oh, that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I mean,
like
it is also like, it's like the unfortunate like moral relativism of like, none of us know what we would do at any given time in,
yeah, and that's what I had to kind of throw that in there because, it's sad because I think there's a lot of people who certainly did not agree with what the Nazis were doing, who did shit just because, pardon my French, oops.
Yeah.
I mean, who else I think did things like that to save their company is those folks there at Puma and Adidas.
Yeah.
And Hugo Boss made the uniforms, so
Mercedes-Benz.
When I was reading the book Coco Chanel's the war one where it talked about collaborators, I was horrified by how many collaborators were half Jewish because I hope that if I were in that situation I would say just shoot me. I don't care. I'd just shoot me. Go ahead. I don't care.
Right. So anyway, always just try to maybe throw in a little feminist slant, devil's advocate. She was a woman and nobody was helping her. So
yeah. And, and when you think about like all the trauma that kind of probably informed her stance too, of like being abandoned repeatedly.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, man, the fact that other one, Paula Reeb, dropped dead on her tennis court after, this, it's like, how many, like, wow, that's a lot too, right? Not one, but two of your lovers dying while you're in a relationship with them.
Yeah.
She must have had nerves of steel. Well, again, she had the morphine every night.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Maybe it's all tracking. So anyway.
Maybe if you're on morphine, you don't notice that Nazis are bad.
I hear it's great. That's what I know about morphine. I hear it's great. I bet it makes everything seem okay.
It makes you feel like you're on like a cashmere cloud and will never have any problems again, I've heard. All right.
So choice dialogue. I'd like to hear you ladies talk about this.
Well, that's usually something where we pick out a few lines that we really liked. So I guess we did awards talk at the beginning.
Yeah.
I guess the line that I liked the best was something that Coco says to Adrienne toward the beginning. The only thing interesting in love is making love. Too bad you need a guy for that.
Yeah, that was a great line for sure.
That was a great line.
Yeah, and I feel like I didn't get the whole quote, but I did like that she quotes Jean Renard, or maybe it's Boy who says this. I've got a good sense of bad taste.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I feel like that maybe it's right when they were getting together at that party, out there on the grounds of the estate. Yes.
So, Roxanne, right. It's 1 through 10, and then we add them up, and then I average the 3.
Okay.
Okay. Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher about how we score movies?
I'd be happy to. We rate movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films, but specially tailored to issues specific to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
So for outward appearances, hair, makeup, I gave it, and like how good of a job they did people at getting people to look like who they were supposed to be. I gave it a 7. I thought Audrey looks so much like her. I guess it was weird to me that they made Balsan so much older, and so pretty good, but not remarkable. For acting and casting, I gave it an 8. For passage of time, I gave it a 5 because I didn't always have that great of an idea of where we were and when we were. For costuming, I gave it a 10. This is a Rena movie, and part of something being a Rena movie is you're watching it for the clothes. For quality of the script, I gave it a 5. For accuracy, 3.5. For storytelling, 5. For production value, 7.5. For production direction decision making, 7. And for do we care, I gave it a 6.
All right. Should I go?
Those aren't bad. Like, I don't know if you've heard the episodes where we score things. It's just that we're anti-grade inflation. So it like...
Oh, it kind of like in the scoring system in the schools in France, it goes up to a 20. No one gets a 20. No one would ever get a 20. If you get a 17, you are like an MIT, scholar. So.
We've only given 2 movies a 10 out of 10 the whole year we've been doing this. And I feel like that's as it should be. Like, if we give something an 8, that's really good. Oh, the ones we gave a 10 to? Lincoln and Milk.
Ooh, I gotta watch Milk. I don't remember if I saw that.
We just...
Sure. So outward appearances, I gave it a 9. Acting and casting, I gave it a 9. Passage of time, I gave it a 3. Costuming, 10. Quality of the script, 5. Accuracy, 7. Storytelling, 5. Production value, 9. Production direction decision making, 8. Do we care? 5.
Oof. Okay, so I'm going to take a stab at this. I'm going to go higher with the outward appearance, or at least like Sarah. I'm going to say that's a 10. Because I'm mostly thinking of tattoo when I say that, frankly. Acting, casting, I give that an 8, maybe. Passage of time, yeah, we don't always love that, so I'll say that's a 6. Costuming, mostly because of that scene in Deauville, or scenes, and the ending scenes, we'll give that a 10. Quality of the script, well, I mean, not for nothing. I really have never written a script a day in my life, so, but, boof, as the French would say, boof. Maybe a 6. Accuracy, yeah, we're thinking that there was some, how do you call that? Liberties taken. So I'll go with a 5. I mean, I don't know if it was cliched. So storytelling, I didn't hate that. So let's say 7. Production value, it didn't look like a cheap movie to me. I mean, I think that's got that French touch. So we'll say an 8. Production, direction, decision making. I don't even know if I know how to answer that one.
Did the producer and the director do a good job at all of the things they had to decide on, which goes back to everything we covered, but also, like, could they have picked a less annoying song, maybe? Or maybe it was brilliant that the song was so annoying, and it expressed what Coco had to work with.
I gotta go neutral on that because it's still kind of like, it's like out of my... So maybe a 5. And then do we care? Well, I'd like to say that, that those box office figures in Europe, where frankly, she is a more interesting known subject, right? I mean, I still think she is more, I mean, think about it. In France, they have the nightly news. They show fashion shows. Like, when is ABC 7 going to be like, and here's what happened at the Ralph Lauren show today?
Never.
So, exactly. So I would say with the do we care, maybe an 8?
That's fine. That's like
based on how much money they make today as a company.
Yeah.
All the people that are buying all that crazy high priced merchandise probably eat all this up.
Yeah. And I guess, like, when I said we don't do grade inflation, it's like 7. I mean, The reason why people say 7s are meaningless is because so many critics are afraid to give something a 5 when it deserves it.
Oh.
My combined score came to 6.4.
Mine
Oh.
came to 7.
Mine came to 6.6.
Okay. Oh my goodness. This has only happened one other time. Coco Avant Chanel, the Nazi collaborators' score is 6.66666666666.
Shut up. So
The
she's
number of the beast.
Shit.
So that means we don't get to do second opinion, which I'm fine with. So other stuff that you should watch instead. Sarah, do you have anything?
The Battle of Versailles, the book, is a really, really good read about fashion and about the industry and where the world was and how, how American fashion shifted. That's like one that I just really love. So I would just recommend that on top of this.
Yeah, if she hadn't died, I wondered if she would have been a part of that.
Oh,
I don't know. I remember like my first week at Women's Wear, we were doing one of those anniversary editions and you were assigned the 70s. And it was like one of our first conversations. I remember you mentioning that you found the death of Coco Chanel in one of those big volumes that they had of all the back issues.
That's right, because we had to go through the things and find out what was happening that year. And yes, look at me.
That must
Look
have been
at you.
so fun.
Yeah.
Yes, that part was stuff like that. I would say there's also this Coco Chanel Unbuttoned. It was a BBC thing. That's where I honed up some of my skills. But I also really think that new look was a lot of fun. I mean, not a lot of fun, but like, I don't know. I thought the new look was really an important piece for fashion people to watch.
I have heard that.
But
I need to watch
yeah.
that.
I think this movie was really pretty to look at, and it's a perfectly acceptable way to spend an evening if it happens to be on a streaming service that you're paying for. And I guess if you come across like any of the exhibition catalogs for any of the big shows that have been done about Chanel, look through it. If you ever get a chance to peer closely inside a Chanel garment, which I don't know if, I mean, that was something I used to love when I was like alone in the wardrobe closet and something came through that was high league and like no one was around to just look really closely at the work. Like, okay, I don't know. My dream is to be able to just get inside a House of Worth dress from like 1870 with a microscope.
Yeah, that would be kind of amazing.
But, and I guess, my favorite movie ever for wardrobe, which has nothing to do with this, go watch Barry Lyndon.
Oh, yes. When I was working at Vogue in the early 90s and they were talking about inspiration from the season, they brought up that movie. They brought up Orlando. So, yeah, no, that was a good one.
Which takes us full circle back to the woman whose clothes from that era I covet as a dark horse, Elsa Schiaparelli, because Marissa Berenson is her granddaughter, as was Barry Berenson, who sadly died in 9/11. Mm-hmm. And they were it girls who we read about in those 70s issues.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, you couldn't have been born for that, but you saw it there. Oh, yes, in those, yes, that.
Right, in those 70s issues. So just bringing everything full circle. Roxanne, before we go, do you have any work coming up, any appearances that you would like to plug?
I just did a talk in Paris. So that was fun. I mean, I will say I don't do as much of this stuff as a freelancer, but I do like it, which is unfortunate. But what else would I like to plug? Just that I'm plugging away in a career that often feels like you're a dinosaur marching to a cliff. But yeah, so I continue to plug away. Got some stories coming up with Grazia USA and still doing my thing with Fashion Network. I'm going to go back to Paris in June. And my daughter is graduating, so I'll stay for men's. I always love to go to men's because it's such a it's just a more civilized situation. And I had no idea I'd be interested in men's shows, and I actually am. I don't know. So I'm like a closet men's fashion adorer.
It's been so wonderful having you
Thank
on,
you.
and you are welcome to come back to do House of Gucci or the Saint Laurent movie for Fashion Week in September.
So yeah, sure. We'll have to think about some others.
Yes.
And I have
Yes,
Excellent.
you have been a wonderful guest. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
And we'll send you some materials for promo when we go live and everything, and you can share and whatnot. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Thank you. Sarah, can you take us out?
Yes. Okay, so our podcast baby has matured, and we have launched a Patreon to defray some of the costs associated with bringing our show to you: platform hosting costs, recording costs, and research costs. And again, I want to be clear that there's only one of us who actually does the work, and that's Rena. We have to occasionally order a book off the internet. We also sometimes have to pay for movie rentals. There's more to come for our Patreoners, but we are offering shout outs to anyone who chips in for us. And with that, we'd love to thank Gates, who has signed up already.
Yay!
And if you like our show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is @BioPickAPodcastStory. So do check us out there, and we'll link to that in our show notes as well. Please also check out our webpage at biopickapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official episode ratings for all of the movies that we've done so far. And if you'd like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about the Tina Turner biopic, What's Love Got to Do with It, starring Angela Bassett, with special guest Katie from the Queen's podcast.
Spoiler alert, Ike Turner is the worst.
Yeah, we rated, I can't remember, did we rate Ike Turner below or above the pimp that Aretha Franklin married, who also beat her up?
Above, because she was with him longer, and their divorce terms were more terrible. Tina's divorce terms were more terrible. We did not.
She came out shining from that.
Oh, she did.
Yeah.
She lived her best life, the back half.
Right?
Her second wedding, she wore black and green Armani and had all the guests wear white.
It's fabulous.
Icon.
So, Roxanne, thank you again so much. And good night to the earnest and the cynical.
Good night.
Good night, Sarah.